In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But war is honest. War ends. What followed did not. At the farthest edge of the Ultima Segmentum, beyond trade routes and well-charted warp lanes, Imperial auger stations detected a phenomenon that should not have existed. A corridor through the immaterium that did not shift, did not scream, and did not devour those who passed through it. It was stable, it was permanent, and it was patient. A wound in reality that refused to close. The Adeptus Mechanicus named it the Blighted Corridor, though at the time there was nothing visibly blighted about it. To the Imperium, it represented opportunity, a means to bypass the unpredictable tides of the warp, a route that could allow fleets to cross impossible distances in a fraction of the time normally required. To the warp itself, it was something far more dangerous. The corridor was not ancient. It was not Xenos in origin. It was not a gift from forgotten gods. It was created by mankind. For centuries, the Adeptus Mechanicus had sought a way to overcome the limitations of warp travel. They dreamed of propulsion systems that did not rely on navigation through madness, prayer, and sacrifice. They dreamed of tearing through reality itself, forcing the universe to bend before human will. Those dreams became reality in a sealed forge facility overseen by magi whose names would later be struck from all records. The prototype was installed across an exploratory battle group and activated simultaneously. Reality broke. The Immaterium howled in pain. An entire Imperial fleet vanished in an instant, erased from real space, without debris, without survivors, without explanation. In the aftermath, the project was declared heretical. The data was sealed. The survivors were executed or mind-wiped. The fleet was listed as lost to the warp. And yet the corridor remained. Decades passed, then centuries. The Imperium moved on, as it always does, until the signals began. Fragmented Vox transmissions echoed across the void. Astropathic screams carried images of rusted stars and green-lit nightmares. Ships were emerging from the darkness beyond Imperial charts. They were battered, scarred, and half-mad, but they bore the Aquila, and they were loyal. Against all probability, elements of the lost fleet had survived. They had been hurled tens of thousands of light-years across the galaxy, emerging near the corridor's far terminus. Their crews spoke of nightmares within the warp, of things watching them from beyond the hull, of voices whispering promises of rest. Yet discipline held. They fortified their position. They reclaimed nearby systems. They raised Imperial banners over worlds forgotten by history. A new frontier was born, linked to the Imperium by the blighted corridor. What no one realized was that the corridor was not empty. The warp is not a sea. It is a mind. And minds notice wounds. Something ancient stirred, something bloated with decay and affection, something that did not hate mankind, but pitied it. From the Immaterium came vessels that did not tear their way into real space. They arrived as if they had always belonged there. Their hulls were swollen with corrosion and growth, armor plates fused with bone and flesh. Icons of flies, bells, and grinning gods adorned every surface. The Death Guard had come. They were led by the Chaos Lord, Aurus Glorus, a warrior who had died centuries ago and never truly stopped. He did not seek conquest. He did not seek vengeance. He sought communion. Imperial auger stations detected the plague fleet too late.
Orbital defenses opened fire, macro cannons shaking moons from their orbits. Lance batteries burned void black scars across corrupted hulls. Several lesser plague ships were destroyed, drifting silently as their crews continued to chant even in death. But the flagship endured. The Nephilim, a massive battleship whose hull had been layered with warp-born blessings. Shells detonated against it and were swallowed by rust and flesh. Energy lances burned into its armor and faded as if exhausted. As the Nephilim advanced, Vox traffic from nearby worlds began to change. Reports of illness spread. Unidentified pathogens appeared in Medicaid wards. Civilians collapsed in the streets, coughing blood and spores. Within hours, entire districts were quarantined. Within days, entire cities fell silent. Plague ships descended upon imperial worlds, not with bombardment, but with landers. They did not seek to destroy infrastructure. They sought to share gifts. The dead did not remain dead. They rose, slowly, painfully, and joyfully. Imperial Guard regiments were deployed en masse. Lasgun fire filled the streets. Artillery flattened city blocks. It did not matter.
Plague Marines advanced through fire and smoke, bolters coughing filth and death. Their armor was split and rusted, yet nothing vital lay beneath. Where limbs were severed, infection spread. Where they walked, entropy followed. The Imperial Navy committed additional forces, throwing entire battle groups into the growing war zone. Astropathic messages screamed across the stars, warnings layered with panic. Plague fleet present, multiple systems compromised, containment failing, request immediate crusade-level response. Authorization was granted, but bureaucracy is slower than decay. In a final act of desperation, the Imperium struck at the head of the infection. A boarding force was assembled, composed of warriors chosen not for survival, but for sacrifice. Astartes clad in ceramite, tech priests bearing sanctified weapons, sanctioned psychers shielded by wards etched into their flesh. They breached the Nephilim. Inside, the ship was alive. The corridors pulsed, the walls wept filth, the air itself carried disease. Chanting echoed endlessly, voices layered over one another in joyful prayer. They fought room by room, losing warriors with every step. Bolter fire echoed uselessly, psychic shields flickered and failed. They reached the bridge. There stood Horus Glauros. He did not roar, he did not boast, he welcomed them. The battle was brief, it was brutal, it was inevitable. Ceramite cracked, faith wavered, hope died screaming. The survivors sabotaged what systems they could. They knew it would not be enough. They chose the void. The Nephilim did not slow. Even among the Death Guard, division followed. Some ships withdrew, guided by prophetic dreams of rot and rebirth elsewhere in the galaxy. But Glauros remained. One ship was sufficient. He ordered the Nephilim into the blighted corridor, toward the Imperium's heart, toward shrine worlds, hive worlds, and holy Terra itself, if fate allowed. In recorded Imperial history, the Nephilim never emerged. The corridor destabilized, warp currents collapsed inward, the anomaly fell silent. Some claimed the Emperor intervened, others believed Nurgle simply withdrew his favor. But imagine, for a moment, that it did emerge. The Nephilim would appear near lightly defended sectors, agri-worlds feeding entire subsectors, forge worlds unprepared for biological corruption, shrine worlds filled with unprotected faith. Imperial reinforcements would take weeks, planetfall would take minutes. A single plague marine can annihilate entire platoons, Bolter fire fails to slow them, blades struggle to pierce their flesh. Where they walk, disease blooms. Some plagues kill swiftly, others linger, spreading through breath, touch, and prayer. Daemons would follow, not in overwhelming hordes, but in sufficient numbers to tip every battle. The Imperium possesses psychers capable of banishing such horrors, but psychers are rare, and plagues spread faster than faith. Hive cities would collapse under quarantine. Commanders would choose which billions to sacrifice. Exterminatus would become mercy.
Eventually, the Death Guard would fall. They always do. Attrition is the one constant in the galaxy. No matter how blessed, no matter how corrupted, no matter how favored by the gods, even the Death Guard are not infinite. Bolter by bolter, world by world, century by century, they would be ground down beneath the Imperium's endless capacity for suffering. Crusades would be launched, sector fleets would be mobilized, entire chapters of Space Marines would be bled white in grinding wars of reclamation. The Nephilim would burn, its plague engines silenced, its bells shattered. Aurus Glaris would fall at last, his corrupted body torn apart beneath overwhelming firepower, his soul screaming as it was dragged back into the warp to be reborn once more in filth and laughter. The Imperium would declare victory, and the galaxy would continue. But victory in the Imperium has never meant restoration, only survival. Because when the Death Guard are destroyed, they do not leave behind ruins, they leave behind rot. Worlds once teeming with life would be reduced to silent spheres of ash and disease, oceans poisoned beyond recovery, atmospheres thick with lingering spores that no purifier could fully cleanse. Entire planets would be declared lifeless, their names struck from imperial records, their populations reduced to numbers in forgotten ledgers. Sectors would be sealed behind quarantine lines, trade routes abandoned, astropathic communication restricted to prevent contamination of mind and soul alike. Millions would die not in battle, but in isolation, starving on worlds deemed too dangerous to save, listening to the Emperor's silence echo across empty skies. Faith would endure, but it would be wounded. Shrine worlds that once rang with prayer would stand empty, their cathedrals sealed behind adamantium doors, their relics locked away by the Inquisition for fear of corruption. Priests would preach endurance instead of hope, survival instead of salvation. The Emperor protects, they would say, but not everyone, and not forever. Among the survivors, memories would linger, stories whispered in void ships and underhive shelters, tales of warriors who would not die, of plagues that laughed at medicine, of bells ringing in the fog when no enemy could be seen. Children born generations later would still carry the scars in their blood, immune systems weakened, bodies marked by dormant corruption. Entire cultures would be reshaped by fear of disease, fear of touch, fear of the unseen. The Inquisition would ensure silence, records sealed, witnesses disappeared. Officially, the war would fade into history. Unofficially, it would never end. Because the Death Guard do not conquer territory, they plant memories, and those memories rot. In the grim darkness of the far future, survival is not victory, it is merely delay. A pause between catastrophes, a moment to rebuild walls that will inevitably fall again. The Imperium endures not because it triumphs, but because it refuses to die. And yet, even death is not final. Because in this universe, death is not an ending. It is a doorway, a transformation, a promise. Sometimes, death is only the beginning.